All right, so now I got the whole roll cage off to see if that 1000 cage fits, but either way, you got to separate the cage anyway just to get this thing to stretch. Got the bed off the back, had to take that off to get the rest of the roll cage off. The plastics are off, and so this thing is ready to cut. Well, actually, I'm sorry, not ready to cut. I got to pull the drive shaft and the throttle cable and the brake line, and then it will be ready to cut. But I'm going to see if that 1000 cage fits. Well, if you're like me and you're wondering what the difference is between the cages, being they're the same width, here you go. The bungs are different. The little grooves and indents, those are all the same, but there's a solid ½ inch or better between the length of the bungs. So, darn it, the 1000 cage will not fit. All right, one of the next thing I'm going to do on this razor for cutting it is, like I said, I was going to cut it on the frame. I got the interior out of it. Now I've went ahead and I've pulled the throttle cable off of this, the shifter cable. Yeah, I got to pull off. Now I've ordered a shifter cable for a RZR 4 800. Being these were an 800 all the way back to the seat, and then it's kind of Ranger behind that. It's using Ranger suspension and different things. So I ordered a throttle cable for a 4-seater 800, and it looks like that's going to fit. And I'm sorry, a shifter cable for the 4-seat 800, and it looks like that's going to fit. But I did also order a throttle cable for the 4-seat 800, and that does have a different end on it. Let's see here. This is the 570 end. It's kind of got that little barrel that hooks into the throttle body. Now, the 800 RZR end just has the straight, so that's not going to work. But if I would have done a little more research beforehand, the RZR 4 900 throttle cable has the same end on it, same curve, same barrel. So I've just ordered up a 4-seat 900 throttle cable, and that should work perfectly for this application. So let's keep going. I've got the drive shaft unhooked on both ends, so I can cut and slide this back. I'm going to take my coolant lines, and I got to cut those, and I'm going to put some hose to extend those out. So I've got the shifter cable, the throttle cable, the drive shaft, and the coolant lines, and that should be all I need to do before I cut this thing in half and divide it apart. So this is where I'm at. I've got the wiring all extended up there. It's all soldered and with heat shrink on there, so the connections are good, nice and watertight. I've got the throttle cable off. Got the shifter cable still hooked up. I've got a new shifter cable for it. It's off an 800 4-seater, and it looks the same on both ends. Got a new throttle cable, and at first I got a throttle cable for an 800, and that was wrong. So I had to order up a throttle cable for a 900, and that has the exact same ends on it as the 570. So I've got a new brake line for it. I'm going to disconnect the brake line after I cut it, just to eliminate how much fluid's lost out of there. So I'm ready to cut these tubes here, the coolant tubes, and go ahead and cut this frame. The drive shaft is unhooked on both ends. I knocked the roll pin out, no problem. So, heck, I'm ready to cut this thing and stretch it. Here we go. One cut down. Well, frame's cut in half, brake line's disconnected, coolant lines are cut in half. I just got to finish cutting across the skid plate over there, and I'm going to go ahead and roll this thing forward and separate it. Whew, here it goes. The big roll ahead for the stretch. Two-piece razor. Front seats are now the back seats. Got some steel welded up to go in the frame rails here and on the outside rails. Got the new drive shaft already. Gonna come along. Okay, this is where I'm at with the Limo conversion stretch on this 570 here. I've welded up the 3/4 inch square tubing and stacked them 3 high, welded them together, and they're into the frames 10 inches on either end there. What I did was I shoved it, because I extended the wiring harness first, so I shoved the material way into the back frame so I could get the front end around and get it onto the extension. Got it onto the extension, welded it in, and then I stretched the razor back out to pull the extensions back out of the back of the frame where they're in. Now I'm lined up. I've got my 29.5 inch stretch. I'm going to pull the rest of the skid plate off and just square it up on the corner to corner of the frame to make sure I'm all good. I've bought some 1-inch heater hose that slips right on this coolant line here. This is a 1-inch aluminum coolant line, and with just some hose clamps to hold it on. I've got the wiring harness extended. I extended it 36 inches just to give myself a little bit of slack. I bought a brake line. This is a rear brake line for a RZR 4-seat 900. Threads right into the junction block, threads right into the master cylinder. Kind of a bugger to get to down there though. Both the front and the rears are. Didn't have to do anything with the front for the stretch, but for the rear I just swapped out the brake line. I have a factory RZR 900 4-seater throttle cable that has the exact same ends on it as the 570 throttle cable, and I'll show you when I install that right into here for the throttle, and that hooks right up to the pedal. So this is all bolt-on factory stuff. This is a real straightforward swap, and it's coming along great, and I'm super excited. Let's keep going. All right, as you can see, this is the throttle cable for the 900 4-seater here. And it has the same ends. Let's get this here. It has the same ends as the 570 one on the left. This is the end for the accelerator pedal. And this is the end that goes on to the engine. So you can see they both have the curve in them. There we go. They both have the curve. They both have the same little barrel end, so this 900 one is going to go right onto the 570. Okay, with the throttle cable, you're just going to run it up from underneath through the clips, just like the factory one came out, and then it's going to go right in through the throttle body hole here. And if you can see, it's going to hook right into that notch there, right where the factory one was. Okay, throttle cable's on. It's back in the little clip and ran back around. This is tightened up into the throttle body housing. Now I just need to run it up and hook it up to the accelerator pedal. Now that will just run, down just like the factory one was. Here along the floor. We're going to go up around behind the firewall and come back in right here to the accelerator pedal, and it's going to mount right to the factory hole. Alright, I've got the frame stretched back out to where it was because I had these bars shoved way into the back part of the frame so I could get the front on, being I already extended the wires first. Now I've got it pulled back apart. I've got it at the correct wheelbase. I've got it stretched to 29.5 inches, so I'm at 106.5 wheelbase. It's the same as the 900 S4, 800S, whatever you want to call it. Not the Turbo S, just the standard 60-inch width S1. So now those are stretched back out. I've got them squared up. I've taken measurements from that corner of the frame all the way to the back corner. Same thing all the way across. Same thing from the front cross members to cross members, and it's all squared up and great. I've got my heater hosed in here for extending the coolant lines for the radiator. Now the next thing I'm going to do is this drive shaft here is off a 900 four-seater. It's the rear drive shaft. Slips right onto the transmission, same snorkel gear, everything slides right on. Kind of odd that there's such different sizes between the 570 and the 900 for the drive shaft. I guess I expected both of them to be, you know, same diameter. So now this one, the stock 570 drive shaft, I've got it splined onto the front differential with the pin in it where it belongs. And to bring it up to about here, I need about 43.5 inches. And this drive shaft runs right at about 64. So I'm going to take this drive shaft and cut it down so my yoke ends up at that 43.5 to spline right onto here. Now I also need to take, I'm going to add a couple cross members. Oh, I can't really move that right now. I'm going to add a couple cross members, one for the carrier bearing to bolt onto, and another one just up in the front. Because I did extend it to 30 inches, I need to add a couple more cross members to it. Factory, you got this cross member here, which used to be about 14 inches from the front. So I'm going to put one up there. And then there's another cross member right behind this that's 14 inches behind that one. So I'll have the second one in here. So I'll have one here, and then I'll have another one up here. And that'll take care of any side strength for the cross members. That'll be the next step. I've got my throttle cable here. Now this throttle cable, I bought it used off of eBay. It was supposed to be for a 900 four-seater. I think they sent me one for an XP because this thing is long. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not. I might have to just order up a factory Polaris one for the correct length because it's just really long. But so that'll be the next step. So I'll keep you updated as we go. Like I said, cross members, shortening drive shaft, and this thing's going back together now with the frame squared up. I'm going to buy a skid plate for an 800 four-seater because that should go right onto this thing, hopefully. And go from there. Okay, I got my frame extensions. I got them bolted in just with some grade 8 bolts on both sides there, just like factory was. Now, my next step is I have this cross member I've got to put in for the carrier bearing. And this is the style like the 800s were, and maybe the 900s and later also. But so my plan is I got a couple pieces of 2-inch channel here, run 2 cross members off and make kind of this box all welded together, and then these will bolt down to those. Obviously it's not going to be raised up high like this. I'm going to spread the cross members out so everything's flush. And then these pieces of channel will be flush with the bottom, so a skid plate can bolt under there too, and it can use the bolts or the cross member going across to bolt into. Now, once that's done, I have my drive shaft measured out. The 570 drive shaft will spline right onto the 900 four-seat drive shaft, no problem whatsoever. The one thing I did have to do, if you can see right here, so it was a white line on this drive shaft. I don't know if that's factory or something else, but this spline was full of metal in between there, so the drive shaft wouldn't slide on. So I just little angle grinder, little file, clean that up a little bit. Maybe it was just a damaged drive shaft and slips right on. So now all I got to do is, once that's on, is I'll take and I'll cut the drive shaft and shorten it up. That way, my factory end can go right on to the factory front differential. I think I need to cut about, what was it? 40 inches or something out of this. I'll have to look again. So I've got a bolt stuck through where the pin goes. And if I measure off the end of the drive shaft, looks like I'm going to need this drive shaft about 43.5 to 44 inches long for the full spline. So probably about 43.5. That way it gets a little bit of movement there. And that's what I'll cut the factory drive shaft down to. And then so I'll just cut this off here, cut out the section of tube that I need to cut out, and re-weld this, right where it needs to be able to spline on. So once the cross member is welded in, those H brackets are up, this can be bolted down, drive shaft can slip together, and theoretically it's back to a driving machine. Certainly not put back together. Still got my throttle cable I got to run up and hook up to the accelerator pedal there. Coming right along. Now, as I've got a cross member welded in there, I'm going to put another cross member up here just for some more support. Got the carrier bearing setting in place. Still have to mount it down. Took my factory 570 front drive shaft and cut it and got the yoke out of there and cut the tube and just re-welded the yoke back into the tube for the correct length. I think I'm at 42.5 or so, 43 for the length of the drive shaft from end to end. Got some bars attached into the frame rail here on the outside to support the seats. And I still got to put some cross members going between here so I can make cage mounts. This thing's coming right along though. It's taking me a while to get it done, just life. But like I said, this is straightforward. All factory parts and easily modifiable parts. Throttle cable's all hooked up and in. The cable I ended up getting is exceptionally long. I don't know if it's off an XP or not. I ordered it for it's just a used cable, just for a regular 900S 4-seater. But got a really long one there. But coolant lines all hooked up. Note to anyone, I tried to go cheap and bought the Harbor Freight hose clamp set, and 3 out of 4 of them wouldn't even tighten up tight enough to hold coolant. So those are junk. Lesson learned. So got some good hose clamps on there, bled the cooling system, got the radiator all filled up. Went ahead and put a oh, paint coming off there. Went ahead and put a cross member across the frame there for some extra stiffening. In the back, built me kind of a H-frame cross member for that carrier bearing and put some spacers underneath the carrier bearing to keep it up. Drive shaft is out of a 1000 RZR 4-seat. The carrier bearing is part of the rear section of the drive shaft. It slips right onto the transmission. Front drive shaft slides right onto that. So plenty easy enough. I made a mistake and put my wires on the outside of my seat post. I may have to unplug them from the dash and move that on the inside just for some more clearance. But overall, this thing is coming together. Just took it for a ride. Runs good. Drives good. Got to put the whole back on it still. Straightforward. I mean, it's taken me forever to get this done, but it's just a couple hours here, a couple hours there type thing. Currently got the 29-inch bighorns on it with the stock suspension because I put the portals on my wife's machine to go out for a ride, and 29s do not work on a stock suspension. So they rub just making a corner backing out of the driveway. But overall, I'm really happy. I got the seat mount in. I took the seat mount there, and on the back, I cut the back bracket about a ½ inch lower than the front to recline the seats a little more, and it definitely reclined the seats actually quite a bit. I'm almost thinking maybe too much. Not a ton of room in the back seat for an adult. That's definitely a kid's back seat. I've never sat in just a regular 4-seat, like an S 4-seater, so I don't know if they're all like that, or maybe I shortened something up, or I don't know what I did. But anyway, the seat from the front of the frame to the front of the seat brackets, 19.5 inches, just like it was factory. So the front seats are in the factory place. The back seats are just where they ended up. It's 29.5 inch stretch on it for the 106.5 wheelbase. Altogether, this thing is coming along pretty good. I got a lot of tidying up to do now. My shifter cable, I ordered a shifter cable, and it's about 10 inches too short, so I'm not quite sure what cable I got there. I must have messed that up. But coming together, got some tidying up to do. Gonna get a cage put on it. I just kind of got some mock-up stuff here. That's a center cage out of an XP 1000. Fits on the width of the frame rails. Just mock-up stuff. That's all aftermarket. Not pertinent to the actual stretch. But everything's good. Everything's good. And the great thing is, this has all been factory parts. Factory rear drive shaft, factory brake line. I could have bought some factory coolant lines, but I decided it's cheaper just to stretch them with some rubber hose. Factory throttle cable. I mean, everything is factory parts on this. I'm loving it. I'm digging it. So I'll follow up when I finally get it all finished. Got to put body parts back on it and things. Thinking about just leaving the portals on the other one actually, and leaving this as a narrow machine. That way, when we're out places, we can hit up some 50-inch trails or some, you know, some narrow trails with the whole family, just for like some sightseeing type things. As it seems like several of the 50-inch trails I've been on around here, nothing really technical, and something like this would more than handle it. But that way, we can all hop in there in one machine and just go for some sightseeing. I'll follow up when I finish up.